Alright, in this video we'll be discussing the top 7 decks for Annihilus and Marvel Snap so far. Now we do have a limited data set, but I thought it'd be helpful to provide you with some decks to get you started with Annihilus, because I know that a lot of people are interested in this new archetype defining card. What you'll notice is the win rates are a little lower than expected, and we have 7 decks as opposed to the usual 10. This is generally because, well, Miss Marvel, for instance, could be applied to many different archetypes, and Annihilus is a little more narrow in its focus. The decks, I think, will get better over time because this takes some significant deck building considerations to truly get right. So let's dive in to the first deck, and the first one and the only one in the 60s. This deck is Annihilus Bounce. What's interesting about this deck is it's really not much of an Annihilus deck at all. Now, this video is all about Annihilus, and this is the highest win rate one at 60%, but it is really just a Werewolf by Night vertical shell that utilizes the best components of Annihilus. You take the best pieces, you get Annihilus, Sentry, and Hood, the 3 best pieces of that archetype, and incorporate it into what is probably the best shell in the game right now in Werewolf by Night, plus a whole bunch of small honor reveals that you can bounce back multiple times with Falcon and Beast and play again and again and again. So really, it's crazy to think that the best deck for Annihilus is really just a really good Werewolf by Night deck. But hey, the stats don't lie, it's exactly what it is. This might be more indicative of how overpowered Werewolf by Night truly is, as opposed to what Annihilus is actually doing for the game, because you're not actually junking them all that much. Yes, you send over Sentry, the Void. Yes, you send over the Hood, and potentially, you know, of course, you do have the Black Widow doing disruption on the other side. But Annihilus isn't sending over the Widow's Bite, it's just there anyway because they have to play it. So it's pretty interesting how this deck plays out, but ultimately, by far, the highest win rate version of Annihilus. Now, once we move into the other decks, we are getting into more traditional based Annihilus decks that you would be expecting, starting with Annie Lockdown. This deck was designed by co-host of the Snapchat, Cozy Snap, and I will be linking his original video down below if you're interested in seeing a full in-depth guide to the deck. It's one of the highest win rate straight up Annihilus based shells, so you're definitely going to want to check it out. Annihilus Lockdown is interesting because you are using the Nebula, which is going to be very valuable for clogged locations, because not only are they going to be enticed to play into the locations, but if it gets clogged, then Nebula just gets a lot of free value. This is one of the ones running the Miss Marvel package because you want to be able to reach into those lockdown locations because you are playing the Professor X and etc. Now, you do have Storm, which is incredibly valuable with something like a Sentry, because if you storm the right lane, they can't really contest the Void moving over by blocking that location under most circumstances. You do have Valkyrie, which can be super valuable here as a counterplay towards not drawing the storm and doing something with that Void on the other side. And of course, you have Alioth, which is incredibly valuable with Storm and with Professor X in lockdown locations. Overall, this deck is running a 56% win rate and is the highest version of a pure Annihilus deck that you're going to find in the current time. Then we have Toxic Annihilus. Now, Toxic Annihilus is kind of one of the archetypes that I was most excited to try. This Hazmat Luke Cage style deck where you're putting over as much garbage as you can, straight up junking them, and then negatively impacting their board as best you can with things like Hazmat and of course Spider-Woman. I actually really like Spider-Woman in my testing with Annihilus, so it doesn't surprise me that she's in one of the best decks for Annihilus and junk overall. Now, this is incorporating Carnage to clear out some of your rocks and stuff in the event that of course you don't draw into Annihilus and you're junking your own side, because I was actually surprised how often I didn't draw into Annihilus. This deck does not run Viper, instead runs Carnage for that reason. Ultimately though, I do think this deck is a lot of fun. I found it difficult, as always, to play with Titania. Titania could be a tricky factor, but what was interesting about Titania is if you played Annihilus into the Titania, and then whatever, like say you didn't have enough to kind of block, you would bounce Rover to help block out their location, which could be pretty interesting as well. So anyways, Titania, an interesting flex in this particular deck. Toxic Annie, a 56% win rate deck. Then we have Man-Anni. Now, this is one of the decks that I was expecting to do pretty well. I think that Man-Thing has very natural synergy with Annihilus, and I expect it to be a package that accelerates the junk-based archetype as a whole. I do expect the best decks to involve Annihilus and Man-Thing together. Very similar to the last deck, except you are running the Absorbing Man for basically the additional debris gameplay. But most importantly, you could also just straight up use Absorbing Man on something like a Black Widow to junk their side even more. You could use Absorbing Man on Hazmat on turn 6. But of course, you do have the Annihilus to kind of throw over the Void, throw over the rocks and everything else that you're doing. And once again, this deck also features Titania. Titania is a little tricky to play around, but as you're seeing, some of the best win rate decks using Annihilus are utilizing Titania to good effectiveness. So if you want to start practicing your Titania gameplay, about now is the time you want to do it. Now we have Annihilus Disrupt. Now this is a much more classic approach to what I think Annihilus was supposed to be. utilizing the still broken Daredevil to basically get an idea of where your opponent will be playing so that you can effectively lock down a location with Professor X and follow up with the Alioth. This is traditional lockdown based gameplay. However, you are running the Green Goblin, you are running the Black Widow, you are running the Shadow King, which can be extremely valuable in the destroy matchups, which counter this deck pretty heavily. Once again, you do have Sentry and Annihilus, which is a great 4-5 combo. Sentry is really elevated by Annihilus, by the way. I don't know if you've noticed that yet, but it is really the biggest winner of Annihilus coming out, and naturally, of course, Alioth, which everyone hates, but realistically is an absolute cube stealer, especially since for some reason people really don't respect that it's in so many decks. So anyways, really strong deck, 54% win rate, still relatively strong overall considering how new Annihilus is. Now this deck here I thought was very, very interesting. It's running a 54% win rate similar to the others, which seems to be the baseline, like 55% for Annihilus. You have an overperform, you got a lot of underperformers. What I thought was really interesting about this deck, of course, was its utilization of She Naut. You wouldn't have thought to use Annihilus with She Naut, and I thought this was a pretty interesting implementation. The idea of using magic to generate a turn 7 and then junking them a whole bunch to better take advantage of your turn 6 and 7 was kind of interesting. The only thing about this deck is, let's be honest, it has a lower win rate than traditional She Naut, so why would you run the Annihilus version or as opposed to just running regular She Naut with Leech and the rest, right? The Evo version that we talk about so often. It just goes to show you that you can't just ram Annihilus into any given archetype and find success, but regardless, it is still kind of performing comparable to the other versions of Annihilus. So it's kind of interesting to see that, like, hey, you just ram him in a She Naut deck and he still runs a 54% win rate, I guess. You are not running all that many kind of disruptive base cards. Again, you have the Titania, but realistically what you're looking at here is you're using the Hood and of course the stones and rocks, I should say, being generated by debris. But ultimately, an interesting deck. I wanted to showcase it. Probably not one that ultimately finds itself being meta because it's obviously replaced by just playing traditional She-Hulk, but still wanted to show you. Now, an interesting thing here I thought was Annihilis Galactus. I know there's a lot of hype around using Galactus. I even tested Galactus in my initial video. Wasn't great. I think there is going to be a decent Galactus version of Annihilus eventually. I think too many people are playing Annihilus right now and therefore restricting the ability to even play Galactus at all because you're getting debris yourself, which is obviously disastrous, and then you have the initiative switch with Annihilus. So once people stop playing Annihilus so much, they give up on it like in a week or so, and then I think this Galactus win rate will actually go up. But right now it's running a 48% win rate, which is horrible. But you're going to see this steadily go up when people stop playing. So I think that it's going to be pretty interesting here. You are running the extremely greedy version of Green Goblin, Hobgoblin for the Galactus gameplay with Dr. Octopus. This is like a classic list that also utilizes the disruption of Sentry and of course Debris with the Annihilus. Regardless, guys, I hope this video was helpful for you. I know that Annihilus is brand new. It's been a very interesting card to try and navigate deck building wise. I hope this video helped. Let me know in the comments if you have any questions, and we'll see you in that next Marvel Snap video.